Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome back to the third and what will likely be the final part of Fritz Peters' Balanced Man, a look at Gurdjieff 50 years later. And I, for one, am very much looking forward to encountering what wisdom and insights Fritz Peters has to offer. And upon the completion of Balanced Man, we will have worked through the 3 volumes on Gurdjieff, and I have 2 of his non-fiction books upstairs. There wasn't much interest at the time when I shared them, but of course we might be able to get them in a poll a bit later on. And like I say, we're close enough to the end that I think we can push through and finish it off. And yeah, for me, Fritz Peters has really brought a new dimension to Gurdjieff the man and the ideas. And I'm very much looking forward to share this with you this evening. If you're looking forward to the conclusion of Balanced Man, Ouspensky's not in search of the miraculous, the Fourth Way tomorrow, and then Dostoevsky's The Double coming on Sunday. As always, if you wouldn't mind, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the show with all of your like-minded friends, and if you want a new Gurdjieff publication, you can find my book, Awakening the Machine, in the description. You can get it on ebook, audiobook, or the physical book through Amazon, and all of those links are in the description. And hello there, Blasphemy B. Nana. Hi there. Henrik Jansen says, I'm in from catching up. Glad to make it this time in time. So welcome, Henrik. Good evening to you, my friend. Mr. Algo says hi. And Blasphemy B. Nana says hi, everyone. And everyone else watching and listening, welcome. I hope that you're well. And do consider saying hello in the chat. Chapter 10. I think Gurdjieff needed a lot of people, but when he introduced me to a group of his students and friends as his real son, who had been at his real school, it began to dawn on me that he had needed me in a rather special way. When I talked to him about it, he told me that because of my particular heredity and conditioning, plus the fact that I had managed to remain open in spite of the various disasters of my pre-priory life, I had been an appropriate receptacle or garbage can in which he could dump some of the accumulation of his life's work. And greetings, Kathy. Kathy K's here. Greetings and welcome. I think that kind of need was epitomized by the permanent inhabitants of the Priory, permanent in the sense that his family was always there, even when he went on trips to America. Tom and I had spent the summer of 1924 in Fontainebleau, and then went back to New York for the winter of 1924 to 1925. Again, you can find out more about that in Boyhood with Gurdjieff. We returned in May of 1925, and apart from trips to Paris or the south of France in the summer, I was there all the time from May 1925 to October of 1929. The first summer, if I remember correctly, Jane paid something for our stay, ostensibly for both of us, but actually only for Tom, as I wrote in Boyhood with Gurdjieff. In later years, again, as far as I know, we paid nothing. We, like the other permanent inhabitants, basically ran the place, working in the gardens, the kitchen, taking care of the animals and the chickens, cleaning the house, waxing the floors, washing the windows, chopping wood for the fireplaces, standing duty in the little concierge house, and so on. We were more or less like a corps of servants, which was the big difference between us and the summer visitors who came from England, Paris, and mainly America to experience something of life at the Priory. Most of them stayed anywhere from a long weekend to a couple of weeks, or even as much as 3 or 4 months, but even a few months could not give them the same feeling about the place as we, particularly the children, had. I reiterate that we hadn't come for any reason. We were all brought there under circumstances that were fairly simple. Jane and Margaret thought it would be the great experience of our lives, correct, at least in my case, and the other children were there because they were either relatives of the children of the various people who had come with Gurdjieff from Russia, Germany, and elsewhere. Hello there, Stephen Lan as well. Says, greetings, honored and respected seekers. So I second that. Greetings. It did not really occur to any of us that we were in a particularly unusual school. It was obviously a great change from American schools, but it took some time for me to realize that it was all that exceptional. In fact, it took hindsight. I had no basis of comparison, and the fact that I had been told that it was a unique place was really meaningless. Having nothing with which I could compare it, it only seemed to me to be a perfectly normal place and with some great advantages. I was relieved of having to go to classes at specified hours. I had a formidable working schedule, usually from about 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., and I learned, as Jane used to put it, like a shark. Fritz is a shark at languages and everything else he does, she once wrote to my mother. I was not so shark-like about some of the physical things I had to do. I could be pretty lazy about work in the kitchen or the gardens, and I did a certain amount of daydreaming, but the habit of work was definitely instilled in me. While I admit to a certain laziness, particularly when Gurdjieff was away, I had a very guilty conscience about it, so that I gradually and almost automatically learned to work hard and to try to do whatever I was doing as efficiently as possible. And just imagine, that's an interesting point he's made there, isn't it? It was obviously a great change from American schools, but it took some time for me to realize that it was all that exceptional. In fact, it took hindsight. I had no basis of comparison, and the fact that I had been told that it was a unique place was really meaningless. So he's a young boy, 8, 9, 10, 11, and normally kids go to normal schools, don't they? As in, the school I went to was a normal school. It wasn't a Gurdjieff school. But as he says, he has nothing to compare it to. There's no comparison. And so it's like, is this what all the schools are like? One aspect of the Priory that is neglected, in addition to the lack on the part of most writers to write about the enormously humorous side of the place, is the discipline, just plain, pure and simple physical discipline. We had to do our daily assigned tasks in the same way that servants would have had to do them. The place would have collapsed if we hadn't. It certainly would not have fallen apart had there been no seekers, temporary visitors who did participate in the work in the gardens and other group projects, but generally they did not do the slaughtering of the animals, cleaning, cooking, and other such chores. Also, their temporary status, plus the fact that they were there for the good of their souls, set us apart from them. Jane may have thought that I was there for the good of my eternal soul, but I certainly didn't. It never occurred to me. I was there instead of being in some other school. Children went to school. Oh, hello there, Graham. The infamous Graham. He's here. Hello, Graham. The discipline and the moral aspect of the Priory were things that most people do not seem to have written about. Although there were articles in many papers and magazines about the strange and reportedly orgiastic activities which went on there, nothing could have been further from the truth. There was no loose living that I was aware of at any time, and any breach of the ground rules of behaviour and obedience was always punished. I agree that some of the punishments turned out to be unusual and even hilarious, but we all behaved with great respect and even a kind of fear of what would happen to us if we broke any rules. When Gurdjieff bawled you out, he meant it, and that was a good deal worse than any other punishment could have been. One of my punishments, which may not seem like an appropriate word, was the aforesaid back-rubbing and walking on Gurdjieff's body in the Turkish bath. I no longer recall what particular mischief I had done in order to merit this punishment, but it certainly had some odd results. The punishment basically consisted in the fact that while everyone else was relaxing in the bath and getting other people to wash their backs, massage them and so on, I had to work, wash Gurdjieff's back, spray him with a hose, and then walk on him. One particular Saturday he announced that he had found a product called, as I recall it, Neat. It was a foul-smelling depilatory, and he lathered himself all over with my help with this product. It made the subsequent walking on his belly quite tricky. He was as hairless as a newborn babe, and I slipped and slid all over him in the process. We all began to laugh so hard that I was then bawled out and made to leave the bath early to go and wait on the tables and help in the kitchen in preparation for the usual Saturday night post-bath feast. I, of course, regaled all the girls and women in the kitchen with my story and didn't consider having to work in the kitchen a particularly onerous chore. I liked to work in the kitchen, and waiting on tables was an honour, since it singled me out from the other children. Not that I did all of it alone, but I always did it, and I was, largely because of my selection as his room-cleaning slave, chosen. Very good for the ego, since almost everyone knew, somehow without any reaction of jealousy, that I had a special position. They also assumed, often mistakenly, that I was privy to a lot of secrets of the master's life. Maybe I was, but I don't at this point know what the secrets were, unless it can be called a secret to have seen him in bed more often than anyone else, or to have known that he drank and smoked a lot in his room. So yes, welcome everyone. Kathy fell asleep. Kathy fell asleep yesterday, so you must have had a long day, Kathy. And you've never heard that word used before, Kathy K. Orgiastic, and yesterday was a rather depending on what time you fell asleep, it was a rather sexy section as well, with people asking Fritz Peters all sorts of physical questions about Mr. Gurdjieff. So yes, and hello there, Dale Axelrod says hi from Petaluma, California. So hello there, Dale, and how's the weather in California? And welcome. And Kathy says, G sounds like a fun-loving uncle, dirty jokes and all. And it's so, there is just nothing, what's the word? Nothing similar. Oh, hello there, Govan from Kansas City, welcome. Apart from the name Gurdjieff, there is absolutely no similarities between Ouspensky's books, In Search of the Miraculous and The Fourth Way, and Fritz Peters' books, Boyhood with Gurdjieff, Gurdjieff Remembered, and Balanced Man. There is nothing similar apart from the terms Gurdjieff, the Prieuré, and some of the other sort of technical language, but it's just, such a beautiful insight. Chapter 11. A great friend of mine who had read Gurdjieff Remembered told me that the trouble with that book was that it changed in character completely at the point where I record the visit to Paris when Gurdjieff called me his real son. As far as I was able to understand the criticism, I believed that what my friend meant was that up to that place I had not really participated as a protagonist. I felt the criticism was faulty and would have been proper to a novel, but not to biography. Biography, by its nature, records something or things that actually happened, and while I agree that the general tone of the book does change with the beginning of chapter 12, in that, in a sense, I become introspective and introduce myself as a character in the book, that is, up to then, mainly reminiscence about Gurdjieff, there was an obvious reason why I had to do just that. The event did take place, and I did not feel that I could remain at a distance once having described that visit to Paris. My reaction to being called his son could not be passed over or omitted. There have been many times when I have thought inevitably that I wish I had never heard of, let alone met, Gurdjieff. Life in the usual daily sense is sometimes burdensome enough without having to carry around the load of being or thinking that you are anyone's son or heir, without the automatic obligation of any heir to carry on some kind of tradition to honour the memory of your father. The automatic assumption of most readers or people who know that I had a relationship with Gurdjieff is that I have some special knowledge or information that I, in my turn, have either the obligation or the need to pass on to them. This assumption may or may not be true, but whatever it is, there are a good many holes in it. People who meet me for the first time, this is a good enough example, more or less take it upon themselves to offer me Armagnac on the assumption that I automatically like Armagnac because that's what Gurdjieff habitually drank. This is both inaccurate and presumptuous. I drink it once in a while, but I am an American, and what I like to drink is whiskey. This is not a digression, it is an attempt to point out a misconception that many people fall into unconsciously, that Gurdjieff in some way cast his pupils or students into what might be called his mould. Nothing could be further from the truth, in spite of the fact that many group leaders are imitative in that they act like Gurdjieff in many ways. Jean Toomer, who led a group in Chicago for many years, began to speak in a Russian accent, an extreme example of being imitative. What is sad to me about such manifestations is that while Gurdjieff taught by example frequently, the imitation of him is nothing more than just that. It is outer and pointless. Gurdjieff, again, in my opinion, taught something very different. He wanted me to be my own man, not an imitation of him. I didn't cross the Gobi Desert on stilts. I didn't study in Tibet. I know nothing about the Middle East, the Caucasus, etc., etc. It seems to me that it should be almost blatantly obvious that what Gurdjieff really transmitted was knowledge, not physical, habitual behavior. Some people think it would be more appropriate for me to have a bald head and a beard. In other words, I don't fit their conception of what a son of Gurdjieff ought to look like, and my behaviour also puzzles them so that they had a hard time getting used to me as I am. This is a roadblock in human relationships. So far as I know, what I received, at least in part, from Gurdjieff was a certain discipline, a capacity for hard work, the ability to concentrate, a sense of humour, a mania for truth, and so on. But these things are part of my equipment, not a version of his. What seems to trouble people who have preconceptions, not only about Gurdjieff but also about me, is that I am not sufficiently reverent for them. Well, I suppose I did go through a phase of revering him. Suppose. I can remember one time when I was in my 20s when someone asked me if I thought he was God, and my answer was yes, I thought he was. For all I know, he may have been. I don't really care one way or the other, and if he was not, I'm pretty sure he knew God. This makes sense to me if only from the point of view that God is, in any case, a concept, not an actuality. No arguments are going to hold up on that score. Just remember such clichés as God is within us or God is love. So I do not mean that Gurdjieff was another concept, a man with a long beard who lives up in the sky. I mean only that, again, in my opinion, he was more fully developed in the sense of understanding how to use and using the full potential of his human capacities than any human being I have ever met. There may be others who are as well or even better developed. I have not met them, and I don't intend to seek them out. I have no desire or need to be a perpetual student of anyone, master though he may be. It is a good idea to remember the name Gurdjieff gave himself, Beelzebub, a synonym for the devil. Since he always emphasized the fact that good and evil are simply opposite sides of one coin, the human coin, one side of him was Beelzebub. Turn the coin over, and you get Beelzebub's opposite, God. The key word in the name of his school was harmonious. No one, to my mind, was supposed to become like Gurdjieff. The harmonious development of mankind does not seem to me to imply that we should all be identical or even similar any more than I would expect zinnias, ideally, to turn into rose bushes. Zinnias is obviously a flower, which I didn't realize until I read Into Rose Bushes. The cornerstone of his teaching, as I understand it, is to become yourself, and to develop your individual capacities and potentials to the fullest extent, not to emulate his mannerisms as if by such emulation you would be developing. If I am supposed to be in any sense wise or learned, it will be in my way, not his. One group leader I knew learned how to eat sheep eyes. A favourite dish at the Priory was roast sheep's head, and the eyes were considered a great treat, because Mr. Gurdjieff thought them a delicacy. I fail to see in what way the exercise in overcoming a repugnance contributed to that person's development, unless there is something about baked sheep's eyes that makes a person wiser and or better. There may be some disciplinary value in achieving sufficient control to enjoy such food, but it remains a rather slow and somewhat tortuous road to salvation, if that is the goal. Salvation is another word that should be examined closely. Salvation from what? The human condition? Hardly. The whole idea behind Gurdjieff's method was to become more human, and not less. Hello there, Catherine Long. Hello, Catherine Long, and welcome. Govan is doing spiffy, and what a wonderful word. Spiffy is a lovely word. I don't even know what it means, but I'm going to find out, because why not? Let's see what the dictionary definition is, because we all have an opinion about what it means, but what does it actually mean? Spiffy. Spruce, smart, or fine. Spiffy. So, thanks for that, Govan. Blasphemy B. Nana says, I understand, Kathy, I didn't make it last night because it's been a low energy few days for me. Well, I hope you're both feeling well and fit and energized. Kathy says, a thought came to me the other day about how G told numerous people that they were to continue his work. He needed them all to continue the work so a more well-rounded approach could be conveyed. I believe G did this consciously. Salzman's work is more spiritual, Ouspensky's intellectual, and Peters emotional and human. And yes, Kathy, that's a good point. And in this Joseph Azizi book that I've just finished, I think Claustres, what's her name? Sophia Claustres, I think, and George and Helen Addy, towards the end of Gurdjieff's life, he would teach them sort of very particular and specific exercises, and he'd teach someone, just like in Ouspensky, he'd teach a bit here and a bit there and a bit there, and Joseph Azizi said that he felt that it was about the members coming together and sort of comparing notes. And so if you've got half the notes and I've got half the notes, if we compare and share notes, then we've got the whole notes. But people need... Oh, yeah, thank you, Nido. Solange Claustres, and I'm pronouncing that probably terribly, but Nido in the chat, thank you very much. And also, this Joseph Azizi has quite... I don't know if it's a negative opinion of Madame de Salzman, but he quotes several times in his book, he says that Madame de Salzman brought the new work. Oh, dearie me, we got some balloons, baby, from... it does what it likes. We got balloons anyway. He calls it new work, how Madame de Salzman, Jean de Salzman, brought in many new aspects that Gurdjieff never taught explicitly, and so through de Salzman, the work took on a new shape and form. But we don't need to digress into that. But yes, Kathy, again, as you say, de Salzman's is spiritual, Ouspensky's intellectual, and Peters emotional and human. And so by reading all of them, then you get a well-rounded approach. If you just focus on one aspect, then, of course, you have a small picture. Graham Fortune says Peters was still growing and forming. The majority of G's pupils were already formed, and it would have been more difficult to influence them. So yes, and like he said in the first bit that we read, what did he say here? I had been an appropriate receptacle or garbage can in which he could dump some of the accumulation of his life's work. So sort of Gurdjieff dumped it into Fritz Peters, knowing, like you say, he's an empty receptacle. And again, he didn't have the reverence that some of the other people had for Gurdjieff, as we learn in Boyhood with Gurdjieff, right? He wasn't a reverent student. And yes, hello there, Catherine Long. Hi. And Kathy says, what about how in Beelzebub he keeps telling about responsible age? Maybe G meant something different. No, I think it's true, isn't it? Because he says to Hussein, his grandson, several times, it's only when you become responsible age that you have to begin to pay for your existence, I think, is the way he phrases it. Tell me, guys, if I've got that wrong. But I think as a child, you don't yet need to pay for your existence, and it's all in Beelzebub. And so maybe that's why he liked Fritz Peters so much, because of his character, his personality, and everything that he'd been through before. We don't know if Gurdjieff had spoken to Jane Heap and Margaret Anderson in private, away from Fritz Peters, because how would Fritz Peters know if Gurdjieff had a private interview with Jane Heap and Margaret Anderson? He wouldn't know, because it's a private interview. And they may have said about Fritz Peters, his upbringing, his childhood, some of the issues that he had. And yeah, maybe Gurdjieff just took a liking to him. But anyway, Kathy, speaking of Beelzebub, chapter 12 begins with just that. Chapter 12. The blurb on the back cover of the paperback edition of Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson quotes the following passage from the book. Quote, to possess the right to the name of man, one must be one. And to be such, one must first of all, with an indefatigable persistence and an unquenchable impulse of desire issuing from all the separate independent parts constituting one's entire common presence, that is to say, with a desire issuing simultaneously from thought, feeling, and organic instinct, work on an all-round knowledge of oneself, at the same time struggling unceasingly with one's subjective weaknesses, and then afterwards taking one's stand upon the results thus obtained by one's consciousness alone concerning the defects in one's established subjectivity, as well as the elucidated means for the possibility of combating them, strive for their eradication without mercy towards oneself. And that, my friends, is one sentence. And I do miss the ginormous Beelzebub sentences, and it's very nice to read it there. Hello there, Billy Kirk from Rio de Janeiro. Hi, Billy Kirk, how you doing? Back to Fritz Peters. Pinch loves that. I love that. That was a great line. I think it's worth reading again, don't you, Pinch? That long run-along sentence, and it's a very... that makes two of us, Pinch, and that's enough, I think. But that is almost... It's just one paragraph, and it really... it encapsulates the whole work, really, or a large part of it. So I'll read it again. To possess the right to the name of man, one must be one. And to be such, one must first of all, with an indefatigable persistence and an unquenchable impulse of desire, issuing from all the separate independent parts, constituting one's entire common presence, that is to say, with a desire issuing simultaneously from thought, feeling, and organic instinct, work on an all-round knowledge of oneself, at the same time struggling unceasingly with one's subjective weaknesses, and then afterwards taking one's stand upon the results thus obtained by one's consciousness alone, concerning the defects in one's established subjectivity, as well as the elucidated means for the possibility of combating them, strive for their eradication without mercy towards oneself. That seems to me to be in plain enough English, at least for anyone who has developed some need or urge to look for something better. It could be reduced to the simpler Americanization of driving oneself with everything in you to get rid of bad habits, after having become sufficiently aware of one's habits to know what they are. The ability to concentrate, to work hard, and to be objective towards oneself is not necessarily or primarily a mystical task, and such abilities are not acquired by meditation. One of the stumbling blocks to many people, although they have a thirst or a vague desire or impulse to be what they think of as better people, is the motive. What good will come of it? Is this the way? Isn't there an easier way? Why can't I see any results after reading all of his books? And so on. Results become a problem, a real problem. What kind of results? What is a better person? I think such people want to get to heaven in a hurry because they hate their jobs, think the world is in a mess, can't stand the daily pointless grind of living, having mixed up sex lives, getting too fat, bringing home the bacon, and all the rest of it. Hello there, DFS Banto or Bento. Hi there, my friend. Welcome. But this is why, goodness me. I'm going to read that again as well. Results become a problem, a real problem. What kind of results? What is a better person? I think such people want to get to heaven in a hurry because they hate their jobs, think the world is in a mess, can't stand the daily pointless grind of living, having mixed up sex lives, getting too fat, bringing home the bacon, and all the rest of it. Let me see. Yeah, I'll finish the chapter, then we'll come back to the chat just so we don't get too distracted. The simplest way to attack oneself is on the lowest level, just ordinary common variety, daily social habits and rotten manners or lack of consideration for other human beings. You can do this in Kankakee, Paris, Rome or anywhere else without ever getting near a Gurdjieff group or any other kind of group. Stop being rude. Just stop it. Let your wife or husband have the newspaper first. Force yourself, even if you feel lousy, to be considerate in relation to whatever people you may encounter. Be polite and mean it. Be charming to your mother-in-law. The fact that she will not be charming in return is beside the point. External considering. You aren't trying to change her, you are trying to change yourself. I can guarantee you one immediate result. You'll be able to say with satisfaction, even smugness, which is also human, that you made an effort. Having made that initial effort, keep it up until you have acquired the habit of being nice to your mother-in-law, even though her behavior makes you want to knock her block off. This course of behavior may seem a long way from becoming a latter-day saint who lives in sweetness and light all the time, but it's a step in the right direction, and in any event, sweetness and light is not your aim. Changing your habits is, and you have to start walking sometime if you are going to get anywhere at all. As to getting to heaven in a hurry, another quotation, also clear enough from Beelzebub's tales to his grandson, seems pertinent. I believe you should blasphemy be Nana. I think so. And as he says there, be polite and mean it. And be charming without expecting charm in return. So another quote from Beelzebub's tales. What a joy. What a joy. Quote, and now, before beginning work on the second series of my writing, I intend to rest for a whole month to write positively nothing, and for a stimulus to my organism, fatigued to the extreme limit, slowly to drink the still remaining 15 bottles of most super heavenly nectar called at the present time on earth Old Calvados. This old Calvados, by the way, 27 bottles of it, I was thought worthy to find accidentally covered with a mixture of lime, sand, and finely chopped straw several years ago when I was digging a pit for preserving carrots for the winter in one of the cellars of my now chief dwelling place. These bottles of this divine liquid were buried in all probability by monks who lived nearby, far from worldly temptations, for the salvation of their souls. It now seems to me, for some reason or other, that they buried these bottles there not without some ulterior motive, and that, thanks to their what is called intuitive perspicacity, the data for which particularity of theirs, one must assume, was formed in them thanks to their pious lives, they foresaw that the buried divine liquid would fall into hands worthy of understanding the meaning of such things, and now indeed this liquid stimulates the owner of these hands praiseworthily to sustain and assist the better transmission to the next generation of the meaning of the ideals on which the cooperation of these monks was founded. I wish during this rest of mine, which from any point of view I fully deserve, to drink this splendid liquid which alone during recent years has given me the possibility of tolerating without suffering the beasts similar to myself around me, and to listen to new anecdotes, and sometimes, for lack of new ones, old ones, of course, if there happen to be any competent raconteurs. The possibility of tolerating without suffering the beasts similar to myself around me is a key phrase. He often said that the world's most formidable human task was to learn to bear the unpleasant manifestations of others. So go back to the example of your mother-in-law. Not really a fair example, some of them are fine people. If you behave towards her with courtesy and respect, your manifestations will have become more bearable and or tolerable not only to her, but to yourself, and a side effect is that you will sleep better as well. Mr. Gurdjieff continues, quote, I have set myself under essence oath, a task which consists in this, ultimately to prove without fail, theoretically as well as practically, to all my contemporaries the absurdity of all their inherent ideas concerning the suspicious existences of a certain other world, with its famous and so beautiful paradise, and its so repugnant a hell, and at the same time to prove theoretically and afterwards without fail to show practically, so that even every complete victim of contemporary education should understand without shuddering and know that hell and paradise do indeed exist, but only not there in that world, but here beside us on earth. End quote. Both of the above quotations are from the author, From Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. And if you've never listened to From the Author, the final chapter of Beelzebub's Tales, even if you've never listened to the whole of the text, I'd highly recommend it, because it's a standalone message from Gurdjieff that, again, stands alone from the text. I may be wrong in saying that I believe the language is comprehensible. I find the entire quotation funny, sad, touching, and very much to the point. I became used to his rather complex language, being a writer. I might put it more simply, but I think any intelligent person should be able to get the real message. Give up your dreams, your illusions, your aspirations for something illusory and in the dream world. Heaven and hell, as he says, exist here. The message is, at least to me, starkly clear and in no way painful. The fact of life is a simple one. We are here and living. With a certain amount of effort, tempered with drinking, play and perspective, let's try to live as if each day is what it is, maybe our last moment on earth. Don't let the sun go down without saying good night to it. Life is a miracle, after all. Let's live it. And I'll read that again, because that's a wonderful, simple statement, isn't it? With a certain amount of effort, tempered with drinking, play and perspective, let's try to live as if each day is what it is, maybe our last moment on earth. Don't let the sun go down without saying goodnight to it. Life is a miracle, after all. Let's live it. And so there's a goodness me, there's a fair few comments in there, and yes, Kathy, when he was talking about being charming to your mother-in-law without expecting any charm back, that is the essence of external consideration, to do something for the other person without worrying about yourself, whereas internal considering would be you being charming to the mother-in-law and then really being upset because, oh, why isn't there any reciprocity? Why aren't you giving me charm back when I've been so charming? And see the difference, right? But anyway. Right, where were we? I did read it again, Pinch and Kathy, and like I say, maybe we need another reading of Beelzebub's Tales coming up soon. DFS Bento says, hello clubbers, it's good to catch another part of Alive. I've really enjoyed the Peters books. That's me too. DFS Bento goes on to say, they give us such a different perspective of G. It's as if G always knew what kind of man he was talking to. I have been reading in search of the miraculous, and G has a more intellectual approach. And yes, you could argue, DFS Bento, that perhaps Ouspensky had a intellectual approach also, right? And so maybe Gurdjieff, this is what we don't know, isn't it? And what a book doesn't convey. But just reading your comment there, DFS Bento, what if Gurdjieff did have a lot of fun? What if he was sort of at times playing jokes and messing around when Ouspensky was there in the room? But for Ouspensky, he's like, I'm not interested in that. I'm not putting that in my book because I'm putting the ideas and it's very serious and we've got the concepts, metaphysics. I'm not going to write in about a joke or Gurdjieff making fun of someone. I'm not putting that in there. So we don't know, right? Pinch says, to see oneself so clearly, one can navigate regulation void of externals. Brilliant. And yeah, there's lots of fantastic wisdom in this just little text. So wonderful. Graham says, women reach responsible age in late teens, men in early 20s. Once we reach responsible age, we can't learn anything new, only rearrange what we already know. Very interesting. I think there's a Kabbalistic or Jewish sort of anecdote, or I don't know what you'd call it, saying, cliche, show me the boy at 7 and I'll show you the man, I think, something like that. So similar to what Graham's saying, that once a child gets to a certain age, it's difficult to change them. Yes, Kathy says, hello, DFS Bento, me too. Really like Peters and how he paints G in a relatable way. It really does, like you say, it really does humanize him. It really does humanize him. Hey, Blasphemy B. Nana, just writing about your mother-in-law. I think that's where you can do some great work with your mother-in-law. If you have a copy of In Search of the Miraculous, or if not, find, or I'll help you out if you message me, find a few sections on external considering and read those, and then next time you go and engage with your mother-in-law, try and keep that in mind and just observe what happens. It will be very different, but observe what occurs. And I see you and Kathy chatting away, so I'm not going to read all of that. Graham says, when you forgive, you're doing it for your own sake, not theirs. And very interesting. Kathy says, life is all about perspective, and we choose daily which perspective we want to consider. Blasphemy B. Nana, keep your ears open for external considering, and that'll help you out. And yes, you're very welcome, DFS Bento. And again, Kathy says about perspective, but also worldview, right? If you read In Search of the Miraculous, try and bring in a lot of what Ouspensky and Gurdjieff are saying, then life will change. As he's saying here, what's he saying? Life is a miracle after all. Let's live it. Let's not be angry with our mother-in-laws, with our boss, with our colleague, with our girlfriends and boyfriends. You know, life's too short for all that. And Louis Powell's Gurdjieff. So I don't have this book. I think I might have to... oh dear. So here we have some quotes, I think. The following are some quotations. Goodness me, I don't have that Louis Powell book, but I think I might have to buy it. So I'll do that after, maybe, because it won't be much fun if I hop onto Amazon and start buying books on book club. So I'll wait till we finish. It's certainly not Catherine Long. It's not a skill that's taught anymore. But we have to take it upon ourselves, I think. Wouldn't you say, Catherine? We have to do the work. The school system is broken, and it's not... I've been talking to someone in education, and I've come to the conclusion that the world that the schools are preparing the children for, it doesn't exist anymore. So what's the point if they're not getting any additional education at home and they're just going through the school curriculum? That world's not there anymore. It's come a long way. But anyway, I won't digress into that because that's for another video, another stream. Chapter 13. The following are some quotations selected at random from various persons who were involved with Gurdjieff and then later wrote about him. So this is a rather nice chapter 13 with some quotes from other writers on Gurdjieff. The first is from Louis Powell's Gurdjieff. Again, got my eyes on that. I'll try and find it after the stream. Quote, Orage, one of Gurdjieff's assistants, called him Pythagorean. This emphasizes very well Gurdjieff's strangeness in the heart of our civilization, which could hardly be compared to the great period in classical Greece. How can one explain the interest of all these Western people in Gurdjieff's Oriental ideas? There is a simple explanation. They appeal to all who seek relief from personal unhappiness in psychoanalysis, pseudo-religious cults and mass movements such as fascism and communism. The ideas have a therapeutic interest which attracted many people to the groups. The answer is that Western culture is going through a crisis. All thinking men must have been profoundly disillusioned by the hope placed in progress. The idea of progress has had to give way to the tragic feeling that Western man has come to a dead end. All efforts for good have produced nothing but evil. Gurdjieff and with him Ouspensky and Orage, while confirming the general despair and destroying the little faith we have left in the resources of our Western culture, have given us hope. End quote. Very nice. And Graham was mentioning this book the other day, and I think I'm going to get it on the Gurdjieff to be read list. From Margaret Anderson, The Unknowable Gurdjieff. But Gurdjieff is not only unknown, perhaps he is unknowable. A Gurdjieffian I know puts it this way. Gurdjieff's failure was that he produced no single disciple who understood what was wanted of him. Perhaps this is true. I suppose it must be. I suppose it is inevitable. But I wonder why I don't quite believe it. Why I think it is close to, but not totally, the truth. If what you say is true, I argue, why do the Gurdjieff groups continue their efforts today? Why did Gurdjieff make his effort? We can't believe that he was without foreknowledge of his failure. If such it was, Why then did he work with his pupils, more for his own sake than theirs? In a way, the pupils are as necessary to the teacher as the teacher to the pupils. The teacher is obliged to give back what he has received. But Gurdjieff never found a man who was able to raise himself to the step below the master. Yet thousands, due to Gurdjieff, took 1, even 2 steps up that stairway of the fourth way, and their lives were vitalized and purified, even with a minimum of work. This I know to be true, so instead of saying that no disciple understood what was wanted of him, I would say that several may have understood, but that they found it too difficult to do what was wanted. The only thing one knows is that if Gurdjieff's theory of human evolution were understood and practiced, our planet would be freed of hate, madness, and war. But since these states are apparently the conditions through which men are destined to struggle, it seems superfluous to try to change them. Okay, Nido, thanks for that. Thanks for that. That's made me question whether I should get it now. So thanks for that. I'm gonna read that again because this is like a powerful motivational paragraph, because we all have to do our own work. We all have to seek our own higher consciousness, and no one can do it for us. And I think this paragraph lays that out. So I'm going to reread that. The only thing one knows is that if Gurdjieff's theory of human evolution were understood and practiced, our planet would be freed of hate, madness, and war. But since these states are apparently the conditions through which men are destined to struggle, it seems superfluous to try to change them. The conclusion, therefore, would appear to be that nothing can be done, that nothing should even be attempted to release humanity from its sad, savage, repetitive fate. And as true as that may be, I can't accept that. To continue with Margaret Anderson. My conception of an understandable book about Gurdjieff is that it should be addressed to the 2 types of influenceable aspirants and written, as far as possible, at least in the beginning, in words of 1 syllable. I would pass over facts, biographical, and concentrate on teaching. I have little interest in facts that people seem to want most. Where was he born? What were his circumstances, his education? Was he the precepteur of the Dalai Lama, etc., etc., etc.? Gurdjieff himself has written about his childhood, his parents, his teachers, his travels, his experience, his knowledge. What matters is the knowledge. Sorry. There's a little printing error, I think. There's no chapter heading. Or, oh no, the page has been ripped out. Can you believe this? Can you believe this? We go from page 90 to page 93. So we're missing 2 pages, or 1 leaf with 2 sides, and I can't believe it. Goodness me. Anyway, let's carry on. Now we move on to Catherine Hulme, Undiscovered Country, in Search of Gurdjieff. Quote, "Man, said Jane Heap, is the highest possible development of the self-evolving form. Nature can do no more. All further development requires conscious effort. The Gurdjieff work she described as a method of effort, conscious effort, not mechanical automatic effort. The start towards such consciousness was neutral scientific observation of oneself to discover from which center, physical, emotional, or mental, most of one's reactions flowed. Reactions, not actions. We must keep in mind that as we were, everything was done in us from outside, that we took no part in our activity because we had no unique central I, only a crowd of personality eyes in continual argument between centres, fighting for their turns in the driver's seat. This, I realized, had been my state ever since I could remember, but I had thought it a condition peculiar to me, the writer who had to live multiple lives in order to understand life. I had even thought it admirable to have such a capacity for varieties of expression. Excuse me. Yes, Stephen, I don't know what he says about Russia and China and the Middle East, but we can read in Beelzebub, can't we? He's got chapters about all the countries, and I believe some of the gems are hidden deep in there. Nido says Powell's smeared Gurdjieff in his book and later in his life regretted it. He never met G himself, so yeah, maybe I'll skip over that one then. Nido, thank you for saving me some money. Graham Fortune says anger is a force that can be used for conscious work if we can direct it instead of letting it direct us. So yes, it's a very powerful energy. And now we're back to Fritz Peters. Finally, the following is quoted from a letter written to me on May the 23rd, 1964 by Miss Ethel Merston, named for reasons known only to an editor, Miss Madison, in the American edition of Boyhood with Gurdjieff, after she had read the English edition of Boyhood. And Graham pointed out during the reading where I mentioned Miss Madison, Graham pointed out that it was Miss Merston, Miss Ethel Merston, and so she's written a letter, goodness me. So this will be interesting because if you remember, she has a pretty hard time, you know, and so we're going to read that. But first, let's see what Kathy says. Oh, Kathy says, it's very easy to misinterpret Gurdjieff. It's only after years of reading and studying that I was able to move past my feelings of mistrust. Now I wish I could have met him in person and loved to hear stories of his life and interactions. And yeah, that's interesting, isn't it, Kathy? And that's your own journey. And I imagine everyone else has had a similar journey or, you know, similar phases, similar things occurring before they came and verified things enough in their own life. I know we do. Kathy, because, well, I can't believe it. I can't bloody, or was there who is it, Victor Meldrew? I don't bloody believe it. Someone's ripped out my pages. Bear with me, I'll try and find it immediately. And then we won't have to worry. Give me a second. Because you can find the PDFs quite easily if you look for them. And so you can find a copy of the PDFs, but I don't think I'm going to be able to find it while I'm here just talking on the channel. But maybe we'll have to come back and find the missing pages. Yeah, I know. I tried, Kathy, very quickly, but I couldn't find it. So I know it's great, isn't it, Kathy? It's wonderful, wonderful. But anyway, this is a letter from Miss Madison or Miss Ethel Merston, and this is what she has to say to Fritz after reading Boyhood with Gurdjieff. My dear Fritz, your book just to hand in India. You do give a wonderfully vivid AC or account of those priory years, and pleasant or unpleasant make one relive them. I nearly said revalue them, but that is done already. I rather squirmed at your picture of me, outwardly to you all so cold and dictatorial, inwardly under the cold mask, an acute fear of the responsibility Mr. G put me into. He knew that in giving it to me, accentuating my feeling of loneliness, but you couldn't know that, or that things like the little black book and reports were by his orders, and also the restrictions on leaving the priory. Also, what you could not know, since it was done in private, several of the old students did not worship blindly, but stood up to him, including myself, using our own judgment, as you did when you decided to leave. Gurdjieff, as you say, he himself said, was no god, but was himself learning. We were often his guinea pigs, but that he knew far more than we did was unquestionable. He was a marvellous instrument, even with occasional mistakes, for making us more awake, a necessary preliminary stage before real work. That he did fail sometimes for himself and others is for me equally undoubted. End quote. Miss Merston went from Gurdjieff to other teachers, and her letter continues, quote, "Many years later, I realized how invaluable G's training of self-observation on the physical center was, and how it had prepared one for the Maharishi's teaching of self-inquiry. Both have to be impartial, but both are the same, one more exterior than the other. G's at the priory was exoteric leading to mesoteric, as he said. The Maharishi's is mesoteric leading to esoteric." End quote. Or no, not end quote yet. I realized that, but for Gurdjieff, I should never have understood the Maharishi's teaching, and the same time that until I met the Maharishis, I had never really understood Gurdjieff. End quote. Back to Fritz. There is, I presume, at least a kernel of truth in all the above quotations, but I'm somewhat disturbed by most of them for the following reasons. The quotation from the Powell book uses such phrases as profoundly disillusioned, efforts for good have produced nothing but evil, destroying the little faith we have, etc. The book is probably interesting reading because it is one book which, whatever the author's intention, turns out to be a diatribe against Gurdjieff, to Niddo's point above, so thanks for that. Margaret Anderson's Unknowable Gurdjieff is very well worth reading and gives a picture of Gurdjieff that is only equalled, in my opinion, by Catherine Hulme in Undiscovered Country. But Margaret talks about the conditions through which men are destined to struggle and releasing humanity from its sad, savage, repetitive fate, so that I find a final negative tone to the book. Perhaps the best of the lot is Catherine Hulme's book, and the quoted passage is, in a sense, unfair to her book in that it is out of context and does not give the flavour of the book, but it is, as it is at its best, a positive book about an extraordinary man. And has anyone read Catherine Hulme's Undiscovered Country? I've recently acquired it, but not read it yet. Again, something else for the channel. Hey, Blasphemy B Nana, maybe share it in the Discord server and I can find the 2 missing pages. Well done, you. Where are we? Let's carry on. As for Miss Merston, she incorrectly assumed that I was unaware that everything was done by Gurdjieff's orders. Nothing could have been more obvious or apparent at the Priory. And finally, her letter tells me only that she decided, for reasons which I do not fully understand, to be a perpetual student. The concepts of esoteric, mesoteric, and esoteric, quite frankly, do not interest me at all. Where are you when you have finally arrived at the proper label for something? I can tell you exactly where you are. You have a label, period. In the meantime, what has happened to living? Recognizing that each day is a new beginning, being willing to be elated, to suffer, to weep, to laugh, in short, to live. Gurdjieff lived all the time, and I sometimes wonder if his books were not destined to be some sort of revenge for the stupidity he encountered everywhere in his life. Wow. It's a harsh passage, harsh but inspirational. That Gurdjieff was enormously human in every possible way, and that his role, whatever it was a complex, difficult, and perhaps incomprehensible one, is expressed in meetings with remarkable men. And here we have a rather long quote from Meetings with Remarkable Men. Quote, "While I am here among people who have not undergone the catastrophic consequences of the last great war, and through whom I shall suffer considerable losses, of course, without intention on their part, I will once again by myself alone, without other people taking the initiative, and, of course, without resorting to any means which could one day give rise in me to remorse of conscience, make use of certain capacities formed in me, thanks to correct education in my childhood, to acquire such a sum of money as will clear up all my debts, and in addition enable me to return to the continent of Europe and live without want for 2 or 3 months. And in doing this I shall experience again the highest satisfaction foreordained for man by our common Father, formulated in ancient times by the Egyptian priest who was the first teacher of Saint Moses, in the words, 'Satisfaction of self arising from the resourceful attainment of one set aim in the cognizance of a clear conscience.' Today is the 10th of January. 3 days from now, by the old-style calendar, the new year will be welcomed in at midnight, an hour which is memorable for me as the time of my coming into the world. According to a custom established since childhood, I've always begun from that hour to conform my life to a new program, thought out beforehand and invariably based on a definite principle, which is to remember myself as much as possible in everything, and voluntarily to direct my manifestations and also my reactions to the manifestations of others in such a way as to attain the aims chosen by me for the coming year." This year I will set myself the task of concentrating all the capacities present in my individuality towards being able to acquire by my own means, before my proposed departure from America about the middle of March, the sum of money needed for clearing up all my debts. Then, on my return to France, I shall begin again to write, but on the sole condition that henceforth I be relieved of all concern about the material conditions necessary for my mode of life, already established on a certain scale. But if, for some reason or other, I fail to accomplish the task I have set myself, then I will be forced to recognize the illusory nature of all the ideas expounded in this narrative, as well as my own extravagant imagination, and, true to my principles, I will have to creep with my tail between my legs, as Mullah Nasser ad-Din would have said, into the deepest old galoshes that have ever been worn on sweaty feet. And if this should be the case, I would then categorically decide to do as follows: to give for publication only the manuscripts I have just revised in final form, that is, the first series of my writings and 2 chapters of the second, to cease writing forever, and on returning home to light in the middle of the lawn before my windows a huge bonfire, and throw on it all the rest of my writings. After which I will begin a new life by using the capacities I possess for the sole purpose of satisfying my personal egoism. A plan is already outlining itself in my madcap brain for my activities in such a life. I picture myself organizing a new institute with many branches, only this time not for the harmonious development of man, but for instruction in hitherto undiscovered means of self-satisfaction, and there is no doubt that a business like that would run as if on greased wheels. So, no pressure, Blasphemy B. Nana, but have you got the PDF? Otherwise, we're going to have to skip. Yeah, sadly, I've never had to do this before, and I'm rather distressed that a page has been torn out of my book. But I suppose it's actually one of the first times it's ever happened. So with all the books I read, not a bad percentage, I'd say. Stephen Lance says, I was a 4 or 5-year-old in Madame de Salzmann's London Institute, and it made me very critical of my state school teachers and unbelievably rebellious as well in retrospect. So yeah, you and me both, Stephen Lance, but I never attended a Gurdjieff group, not in this life anyway. Graham says he's not read Hume's Undiscovered Country, so okay, I'll keep that in mind, Graham. And look at this. Blasphemy B. Nana has come through. So everyone needs to give big props to Blasphemy B. Nana, who has come through with the PDF. And so we're not going to have to miss any pages now. So, muchas gracias, Blasphemy B. Nana. Kathy says, wow, that's very interesting, Stephen. You seem to have gotten a head start. I had to muck through all of my conditioning and trauma first and had to battle for fear of the unknown for a long time. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that, Kathy. Hello there, Voldemar. Voldemar says, greetings from planet Poland. Hi to all searching souls. So hello there, Voldemar. Hope you're well. And he says, Kathy says, hello, Woldy, soul searcher friend. Stephen Lance says, I'm flattered indeed, but still not unbuffered to the required level, methinks. Bless you, Binana says, it looks awful, but it's in Discord. I've got it, my friend. Thank you very much. Kathy says, that's a good thing, Stephen. Something to keep busy with, work on life with real purpose. Graham Fortune says, I read Madame de Salzmann's quote, I never understood Gurdjieff if he talked in riddles. And hello there, Flibberty Gibbets, welcome. So now I need to find where we are, and we're at chapter. Let's hope it's there. Chapter 14, page 91, I think. I think the pages are correct. So, hey, it certainly is. Well, like I say, here we go. Well, Blasphemy B. Nana. Thanks. No, I know, Kathy K. Me too. And this is where a collective, a group, is very helpful, because Blasphemy B. Nana had a strong desire, went away, found the PDF, and now we have it all in a timely fashion. Whereas I had a little look, I couldn't find it, and we would have just skipped over. But now we have no need to skip. And if I just hold my phone like this, no one will know any different. Chapter 14. I could continue to quote material that has been written about Gurdjieff, but I think the quotations I have already used are sufficient to make my point. Stanley Knott, Maurice Nicole, Ouspensky, Mr. and Madame de Hartmann, Iris Popoli, to name a few, have also written about him extensively, about the meaning of his work, the strength of his personality, and so on. Why has no one written about him simply as a man? The only conclusion I am able to reach that seems logical and believable is that people who have some need to search or to find something that will make life more meaningful have a built-in defect, the need to create some kind of God. Such people, and they constitute the majority, certainly of all persons who are neurotic, dissatisfied, questioning, etc., have stars in their eyes. It appears to be a property of students to need gods. It seems to me that it is because of this that Gurdjieff is gradually becoming elevated to the status of a new religion. Having lived closely with him in the rather rough and ready style of a boy with a man, and finding him all too human, the incipient stars in my eyes and the need to create a god for myself were eradicated at an early stage. I had the same tendency to make a god out of Gurdjieff. In fact, I think I did make a god out of him. It was an interesting experience. If he is a god, then gods are merely that much more human. In this third series of his writings, recently published privately and not sold in bookstores, Gurdjieff says very few simple words about mankind. In the published book, Life is Real Only Then When I Am, he writes, quote, "Such is the nature of man, that for your first gift he prostrates himself, for your second kisses your hand, for your third fawns, for the fourth just nods his head once, for the fifth becomes too familiar, for the sixth insults you, and for the seventh sues you because he was not given enough." Oh no, it's fine, blasphemy be none, it's fine and dandy. In the original manuscript of the same book, he wrote, quote, "Suffering is a stick with two ends. One leads to the angel, the other to the devil. Man is a very complicated machine. Side by side with every good road there is a corresponding bad one. One thing is always side by side with another. Where there is little good, there is also little bad. Where there is much good, there is also much bad. The same with suffering. It is very easy to find oneself on the other road. Suffering easily becomes transformed into pleasure. You are hit once, you are hurt. The second time you are hurt much less. The fifth time you already wish to be hurt. One must be on guard. One must know what is necessary at each moment, because from the road one may fall into the ditch." Now we're back to the text, and thank you again, Blasphemy be Nana, that we didn't have to miss out 2 pages. And we're back. People whose energy, subconscious drives or search have led them to Gurdjieff or Krishnamurti or the Sufis, or seem to feel that it is essential to suffer publicly in order to acquire any status as a seeker. Look the part, be devout. Well, the outer world of man, the presentation we give of ourselves, since we seem to be innately self-conscious, is only one side of the coin. True development is never outer, but only inner. The outer world, given the establishment of good worldly habits, good manners, efficiency, courtesy, regard for others, will take care of itself. In order to avoid the disciple routine, the performance of being interested, serious, self-improving, etc., it might just as well be remembered that the knowledge that Gurdjieff was attempting to disseminate has been available in the English language for a long time. John Donne, anyone know of John Donne? John Donne, born 1573 and died in 1631, knew a great deal about the fallibility of man. In Devotion No. 4, he wrote, quote, "It is too little to call man a little world. Except God, man is diminutive to nothing. Man consists of more pieces, more parts than the world doeth, nay, the world is. And if those pieces were extended and stretched out in man, as they are in the world, man would be the giant and the world the dwarf, the world be the map, and the man the world." End quote. And if those pieces were extended, I simply take to mean developed. And here Rabindranath Tagore wrote in the 20s, quote, "The West has misunderstood the East. This is at the root of the disharmony that prevails between them. But will it mend matters if the East in her turn tries to misunderstand the West? The present age has become powerfully possessed by the West. It has only become possible because to her is given some great mission for man. We from the East have come to learn whatever she has to teach us, for by doing so we hasten the fulfillment of this age. We know that the East also has her lessons to give, and she has her own responsibility of not allowing her light to be extinguished. The time will come when the West will find leisure to realize that she has a home of hers in the East, where her food is and her rest." And what about Pythagoras? In the Golden Verses you read the following, and I have a copy of the Golden Verses of Pythagoras upstairs, and also the Life of Pythagoras by Iamblichus. And the Golden Verses are wonderful. And this is from, and what about Pythagoras? In the golden verses you read the following, quote, "Speak not nor act before thou hast reflected. Be just. Remember that a power invincible ordains to die, that riches and the honours easily acquired are easy thus to lose, and to the evils which destiny involves, judge them what they are, endure them and strive. As much as thou art able to modify the traits, the gods to the most cruel have not exposed the stage. Even as truth does error have its lovers, with prudence the philosopher approves or blames. If error triumph, he departs and waits. Listen, and in thine heart engrave my words. Keep closed thine eyes and ear, gainst prejudice of others the example fear. Think always for thyself, consult, deliberate, and freely choose. Let fools act aimlessly and without cause. Thou shouldst in the present contemplate the future. That which thou dost not know, pretend that thou dost. Instruct thyself, for time and patience favour all. Neglect not thy health, dispense with moderation. Food to thy body and not to the mind repose. Too much attention or too little shun, for envy thus to either excess is alike attached. Luxury and avarice have similar results. One must choose in all things a mean, just and good, end quote. And that is from the golden verses of Pythagoras, translated and with examinations by Faber d'Olivet. Back to Fritz Peters. One could spend years quoting from writers and philosophers who knew that man had and has potentialities which he does not use or develop, that man has a conscience, that man needs self-discipline, that man has aspirations, etc., etc. My fixation with Gurdjieff is, of course, based on the fact that I knew him. Also, while I am in no position to know what the Maharishi did for Miss Merston before she died, and am unable to state with any assurance that what he was or is doing in India is not just as important as anything Gurdjieff did during his lifetime, I do know that what was going on in Fontainebleau during the 1920s was a great teaching based on a great discipline. The Western passion for results might lead some people to quarrel with this statement, but I will stand by it if only because, in any event, most of us would not recognize a great discipline if we met one. I am sure from my own experience that I am fairly highly developed, and this is largely due to Gurdjieff. And what do I mean by developed? Well, anyone who knows me either thinks that I am self-disciplined, capable, efficient, considerate, thoughtful, sensitive, and a fanatic, or else they think I'm crazy. I think it is about equally divided so far, and I couldn't care less about what people think. One clue, however. Don't try to judge a man's wisdom, development, or knowledge by his position in life, the clothes he wears, the way he speaks, or his occupation. The attainment of consciousness is not something that advertises itself in those ways. A learned man does not necessarily proclaim it to the world by setting himself up as a teacher, as Gurdjieff did and as Idris Shah, Krishnamurti and others do now. In fact, a learned man does not necessarily want to set up shop in order to pass his knowledge along to others. It can be done without all the outward trappings of PhDs and scholarly eminence. Knowledge can be passed on in any way in which human beings are able to communicate. It is usually invisible. Excuse me. We're at the final 2 chapters, so we may as well plough ahead and get on with it and read the last 2 chapters. And like I say, it's been quite the journey through Fritz Peters' 3 texts on Gurdjieff, and I've been happy to share it with you. And it really, like I say, I've said it loads of times, it really has brought a new light and a new perspective on Gurdjieff the man. And for that, I'm very grateful. So, chapter 15, the penultimate chapter, chapter 15. Although the fact is usually disappointing to the would-be disciple of today, the work that Gurdjieff was doing with his students and or disciples in the 1920s was basically practical. To quote Miss Merston again, her words, quote, I realized how invaluable G's training of self-observation on the physical center was, end quote. Self-observation is primarily a simple exercise. It is not per se a mystical exercise. It is the best way of becoming acquainted with, that is, fully aware of, the physical body. As Gurdjieff explained, the body is the best place to start for an obvious reason. It is visible to the eye and we already know something about it. We know how to go to the bathroom. We know something about the use of our hands and so on. Observe the body, he told us. Find out why and how it works. The only real difficulty with the exercise is that most disciples seem to confuse self-observation with self-consciousness. When they actually go so far as to observe themselves, they tend to be embarrassed by what they see. Unconscious physical habits are frequently unpleasant. Picking one's nose, scratching, grimacing, making meaningless gestures, and so forth. In other words, their emotional response almost immediately destroys or distorts their vision. They try not to pick their noses because it embarrasses them, or they are ashamed of finding out that they have been doing this unconsciously for years. The immediate cessation of a habit, trying to stop it without replacing the physical impulse, the nervousness that created the habit in the first place, is nowhere near the point of the exercise. The essential thing is to let the body, in spite of one's emotional reaction to what one sees, go ahead and do what it does, to see what one is, not to alter the long-established habit and project an image of what one would like to be in the eyes of others. It is an embarrassing process, but if one is able to achieve observation without allowing the self-consciousness to edit the manifestations, one will begin to know what he or she is really like. Whether we like it or not, the physical habits, manifestations, gestures which we have acquired over the years are the uniform that we wear for the world. When we find out, by a sudden attack of awareness, that we don't like the uniform, we try to change it at once. Through the use of our emotional and mental critical values. On the other hand, if one's awareness or observation is really impartial, the body will, of itself and usually rather rapidly, discard unnecessary gestures. The mental and emotional reactions or self-consciousness might be called the gimmick in the exercise. The best description of self-observation that I have come across is in Kenneth Walker's Venture with Ideas, and here we have a quote from Kenneth Walker, quote, "A little time ago, Mr. Ouspensky, you told us that we were not to accept what you said, but were to test it on ourselves. I think you mentioned self-observation." Ouspensky nodded. "Now, isn't there a danger of becoming too introspective if one does that? Doesn't one tend to think about oneself too much as it is?" "I didn't say think, I said see," he answered. "Thinking, and by this you probably mean analysis, isn't wanted, for even if analysis does not begin with imagination, it always ends with it. Analysis comes much later. One simply observes oneself." "I thought you said that one hadn't got a self, so how can one observe what doesn't exist?" said a man who enunciated his words very clearly. He looked as though he might be either a schoolmaster or a lawyer. "You confuse yourself with words," Mr. Ouspensky answered. "Never mind about theories of having a self or not having a self. When one observes oneself, all that one does is to turn the attention inward and become a spectator of all one's activities. The French verb constater describes best what I mean. One registers everything instead of allowing it to pass unnoticed. One becomes aware of what formerly one has not seen." "Isn't that rather like self-analysis?" remarked somebody brightly. "The very reverse. I've always said that analysis is not required," answered Ouspensky. "I say one thing and then a few moments afterward you say another. In the system of knowledge I teach you, use is made of a very exact language, and before we can go any further, this language must be studied." He then proceeded to give very precise instructions for self-study. One was to look at oneself, at Mr. A or Mr. B or Mr. C or whoever one happened to be, as though looking at another person, noting without comment how he moved, thought and felt. Naturally, one would discover in Mr. A or Mr. B or Mr. C things that one liked and things that one didn't like, but bad things should not be criticized or good things approved. All that was required was to register everything as it happened, to become a spectator of one's various reactions. One thought that one knew oneself, but this was far from being true, and many discoveries would be made if one observed in the right way. Self-knowledge was the beginning of all wisdom, and self-study was a necessary preliminary to self-knowledge. Yes, Voldemar, that's one way to do it, my friend. Back to Fritz Peters. If the student allows his critical faculties to take over and then begins to act out his desired projection of himself, the role in which he hoped others will see him, he will not have learned anything about his physical mechanism. It is of considerable help to learn to look at oneself with the same impartiality as one might look at any mechanism or machine, say an automobile. No matter how one may react to the car will not change. It will remain a machine with a certain number of physical attributes and parts, 4 or 6 cylinders, tires, a windshield, brakes, a motor, and if the car, through negligent, i.e. unconscious use, has developed defects, dents, scratches, a flooding carburetor, brakes that do not work, any sensible owner will note such facts. He will not pretend that the defects do not exist or try to hide them from the world with a coat of paint. That kind of impartial observation, sometimes Mr. Gurdjieff called it opposing I to it. I being one's consciousness, the thing that observes, and it being the thing, the body, that is observed, is the first and most important step. I'll read that again. That kind of impartial observation, sometimes Mr. Gurdjieff called it opposing I to it. I being one's consciousness, the thing that observes, and it being the thing, the body that is observed, is the first and most important step. Once the mind, the eyes, and the emotions recognize the parts of the mechanism that do not work efficiently or properly, then the owner of the car, yourself, will almost mechanically do something about the repair work or go to a mechanic. Gurdjieff, however, was not a mechanic. You are the mechanic, and the only way to become an expert mechanic is to learn how the car operates and how to operate it. Turn back to the human body as opposed to the car. The function of a car is, whatever else one may think it is, to transport you to some destination. If the car will not run, you can probably trade it in and buy a new one. Unlike the car, however, we have only one body. It is the vehicle which we inhabit, and it is the only one we will ever have. So it is essential, it really is a matter of life and death, to take care of it. And in order to do that well, it is equally essential to admit absolutely truthfully that the mechanism, at whatever age we finally look at it, is in some ways defective. Once this admission is made, once one has learned the faults, the bad habits, the nose-picking and so on, and the process is not necessarily slow or rapid, then one can begin to make repairs, to replace the bad habits with good ones, good in the sense of effective habits that help the body to function more efficiently, habits that do not waste energy, habits that will increase the possibility of making a safe and not too costly journey through life. The purely physical habits will be taken care of by the body itself. If you are really concentrating on baking bread, cleaning the house, repairing the roof, or whatever you may be doing, you won't have time to pick your nose during the process unless it is essential for you to do so at that moment. The reason for the immensely varied conditions of work at the Priory, we did everything imaginable, is to provide the opportunity of becoming conscious of and honestly acquainted with what we are, under every possible condition of life. Some kind of priory where life circumstances are reproduced, as it were, in miniature, is very important to what Mr. Gurdjieff had to impart to his students. But it is not necessary to find or create a priory. It is probably impossible for the average person to do so in any case. Some of the present-day Gurdjieff groups or Gurdjieff or Spensky centers do make a laudable effort to reproduce working conditions which duplicate life in much the same way as it was done by Mr. Gurdjieff. There is only one missing element, however, Mr. Gurdjieff himself. Valiant as the efforts of some of the present-day groups are, and I hasten to point out that I know very little about them, and that my description or observation of them is very limited indeed, I don't think they are valuable to everyone. Not just anyone can be admitted, but, in my opinion, they are not absolutely necessary. The whole world is, after all, the real priory, and it is certainly priory enough. There is no longer any need to reproduce what already exists. I assume that in the 1920s there was a reason to do so. Gurdjieff certainly thought so, or he wouldn't have done it. But caution. To emphasize the need for caution, I repeat something from Mr. Gurdjieff that I have already quoted. Quote, "Where there is little good, there is also little bad. Where there is much good, there is also much bad." Perhaps the admonition to be cautious is not really necessary. If the world is going to hell, falling apart, or coming to an end, try applying the quoted words backwards. Where there is much bad, there is also much good. I happen to think that my bet belongs on the good side. I want us to win the race, not lose it. So in that sense, good and evil cancel one another out. They are finally concepts, and we have to take a stand. I want to be a good man, as good as my concept of human propriety and behaviour will permit. So I try to make decisions that are fair, just, honest, and conscientious. I try to respect the rights of others at the same time. The world will become a good place only if each individual makes that effort. So, while it is perhaps depressing to find so many conflicting philosophies and religions hammering away at us and confusing us, I can only suggest making a decision and picking one of them. A good Catholic is going to be a more effective and responsible person than a bank robber or a murderer. I'm not trying to sell Gurdjieff to anyone, but through circumstances over which I had no control, I was exposed to him at an early age. I don't think he is for everybody, but he happens to be the right man for me. I had no choice in the matter. He was my father, as he put it. And so here we come to the last chapter, my friends, and I'll just read the comments if I can, or the chat. Eyes are getting a bit tired. I might need to lean in, but Stephen says, Gurdjieff's Law of 3 and Law of 7, Giza, 3 stars of Orion's belt, 7 stars of the Orion Hunter. The angle of inclination of the Great Pyramid is 1/7 of a circle. Goodness me, Stephen Larn, that's quite the there's quite the connection there, and thanks for for sharing that. I'll have to look that up. Bless Me Be Nana says, when you think about children, they don't get embarrassed by things like that. That's right. They're not self-conscious, are they? Bless Me Be Nana goes on to say, it's not until later in adolescence that we become self-conscious about things. I was more aware of how things felt in my hands. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, Voldemar says, that reminds me of being stoned, being aware of myself and others too much. Excuse me. And Graham says, being aware or being present, Voldemar. Excuse me. Kathy says, the how is why we're here. Can't trade it in for a newer model. Bummer. We're all fixer-uppers. Yeah. And like you say, you have to, yeah, well, it's a bit trite and cliche, but what do they say? Your body is your temple. And in a Platonic sense and Bhakti yoga, the soul inhabits the body. Plotinus says that we are, you have the body, the soul, and the couplement is the combination of the both. So in the Platonic and Neoplatonic and also Bhakti yoga perspective, the body is the temple that houses the soul. So we have to look after this mortal body. Voldemar says, I don't like to be stoned since I work on being present, Graham. working on myself, maybe super aware as side effect, I suppose. He was his father. I feel for him while G closed the door in front of him, saying goodbye. I know, it's very sad, isn't it? But the final chapter, chapter 16, Balanced Man. I assume that Gurdjieff was not alone in being what I would call balanced, but I do know that he is the only human being I have ever known personally whom I would refer to as balanced. His centers, physical, emotional, and mental, were all on an even keel. He was the only human being I have ever seen or known who was ever involved in human stupidities, who was not led around by his physical drives, be they sex, hunger, or whatever. He was sometimes cruel, perverse, difficult, and incomprehensible. But what most readers, seekers, and just plain people seem to forget is that they look at him, whether in person or through his writings, with their eyes, and not from any objective moral standpoint. When he was cruel for a very good reason. He was doing something for the person to whom he was being cruel, trying to wake them up, most likely. I don't consider myself, for example, as balanced in the sense that Gurdjieff undoubtedly was, but I did learn one thing that people dismiss somewhat airily, that the basic principle of work of oneself is to be disciplined and to actually do the work. I am told that all and everything is unreadable. I agree, but only in the sense of literature. It was not intended to be a work of art in competition with Shakespeare or anyone else. Reading it is a method of work, and if a person believes that Gurdjieff had some method that would enable an individual to achieve harmonious development, the first step is merciless work. If you find that 5 pages of all and everything put you to sleep, force yourself to read 10. In other words, in whatever you do, acquire not only a second wind, but a third wind. Unless we are severe with ourselves, particularly our emotional center, we are not going to achieve any sort of detachment from the human bog that we continually complain about. Everyone I know, without exception, is bogged down in some kind of sewer, usually brought on by their physical and emotional drives. They are unhappily married. They have a rotten sex life. They hate their relatives. They cheat their friends. They don't produce a full day's work because they think they are not sufficiently well paid, and so on ad infinitum. What is even worse is that they are often ruled by such emotions as jealousy, envy, and pride. The Gurdjieff work, as he pointed out ad nauseum, is not for everyone. There is a good reason for that. Not everyone is destined to develop. I'll read that again for some reassurance and gain nice perspective for when we go out into life. Not everyone is destined to develop. I have quoted some people in this book and more or less labelled them as prophets of doom, so let me take my turn at being just such a prophet. If anyone is able to look at nature objectively and impartially, there is one obvious fact that should be seen with great clarity. Man is an organism, whatever we may think to the contrary, and as such, he is much like animals and vegetables. He overproduces. Nature is profligate. For every potential new plant, there are probably hundreds of thousands of seeds. For every animal or human being born, the waste of semen is fantastic. There must be a reason for this. The planet Earth needs to be fertilized by the organisms which live on it and are, or so it often seems, doing their best to destroy it. So a great many useless, from our so-called sophisticated point of view, organisms are created. Man, as opposed to plants and animals, is endowed or cursed with the possibility of not being useless. But in order to achieve what could be called usefulness, it is necessary to work for it, consciously and ruthlessly. Look around you. Not many people are going to do that. The ones who do have a chance and the ones who don't, do not. That's really all there is to it. The world per se does not need saving. There's nothing wrong with it. We people probably do, and while prophets and leaders and messiahs can show us ways and means of doing something about this condition, we are the ones who have to do it. The end. And what a final page there. Maybe have to crop that out into a short because that's very powerful. Very powerful. And again, the reiteration of we have to do it. We're all going to go away, all of us. It's been a wonderful reading tonight, so thanks everyone so much for joining. But we're all going to go away into life on Wednesday. We're going to wake up Wednesday. We're going to have a new opportunity, a new life, a new day. Inshallah, God willing, we will wake up. And if we do, that's already a win. And then we go out into life, don't we? We have to make the efforts. We have to have the intention to be awake, to be conscious of ourselves. And without that, well, we just go on automatically and in sleep. So it requires a conscious effort, some energy, and it's a good thing to set one's intention first thing in the morning, to sound the first note in the octave that will continue throughout the day. And so I, for one, am a fan of Fritz Peters. I'll say that much. I hope you all are too. And tomorrow we'll be back with something a lot more dry and intellectual, but no less valuable. Ouspensky's The Fourth Way, chapter 10, I think, 9 or 10. We'll read that chapter. And then many people want to hear Dostoevsky's The Double. So we will begin that on Sunday night. And then we're free now. We've finished Balanced Man. So I'll maybe put a poll out whether people, the next Gurdjieff book, whether they want, I think you can choose from, well, I'll surprise you of what you can choose. So keep your eye out for a, probably next week the poll will be the next Gurdjieff book that we'll read, because we'll have The Double, which will sort of take a week, perhaps 2 weeks. It's longer than Notes from Underground. And then we've got a lot more books to read. On Thursday, I've got a new book haul coming out with books on magic, witchcraft and sorcery, mind control and propaganda, and religious unification, and some miscellaneous ones at the end, so don't miss that if you're interested. Jordan Flesher, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure. Stephen Lance says, I'm going to the doctors because I'm an old geezer. And I'm becoming an old geezer. Voldemar says, I'm going to the doctor because I'm an old soul. Graham says, excellent book. I imagine you're referring to Balanced Man. I thoroughly enjoyed it also. Good night, Blasphemy Be Nana. Voldemar, it's an absolute pleasure. You're welcome. Thank you all for joining. And what a journey it's been through Fritz Peters. I, for one, have had a great time sharing these with you. Blasphemy Be Nana is interested in witchcraft, so look out for the book haul video coming soon. Good night, Kathy. Graham staying away from doctors. Me too. Stephen says, thank you for the book reading. It's been amazing. I agree with that, Stephen. I've had a great time. So, guys, look after yourselves. Enjoy the rest of your week. And I hope to see you tomorrow for Ouspensky's The Fourth Way. If not, Dostoevsky's The Double on Sunday. And if not, well, then I'll see you next time. Take care, guys. Have a great week. And I'll see you soon. Bye now.